Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Backstage Live at the Saturday Early Show. Last month, the unemployment rate dropped to 9%, but the economy only generated 36,000 jobs. That's why we have Michael Santoli here from Barron's. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming back to see us. So why these disappointing numbers?
It seems as if, well, a couple things going on. Weather and a continued reluctance of big companies to get aggressive on hiring, even though a lot of things would tell you that they should be ready to hire. They're very profitable. The global economy is growing, etc. I do think that signs are pointing to a pickup in hiring, but it didn't happen in January. The unemployment rate going down was a bit of an anomaly. It was mostly a result of people saying that they didn't look for work recently. And if you don't say you're looking for work, you're not counted as unemployed. So that was a little bit of a kind of a bad news disguised as good news decline in the unemployment rate.
Well, speaking of good news, the manufacturing sector is actually doing remarkably well.
The manufacturing sector in this country is almost in boom times, which people don't really recognize. Now, part of that is because the manufacturing sector is a smaller part of the economy than it used to be. But you've seen a number. You saw a number last week in terms of the breadth of manufacturing expansion last month, which was the highest it's been since 2004. In fact, higher than any time in the 90s boom. So what you're seeing is automakers and other export-related manufacturers are doing extremely well. And in fact, the employment component of the manufacturing number was very strong as well. So that's good news, obviously. And it's probably got some legs. I think that's sustainable to some degree. But it's not necessarily something that the whole economy is feeling.
But will we see employment in that particular sector continue to grow, or has it hit its peak?
No, it should probably continue to grow. The employment number in that particular index, the ISM index that was reported last week, is actually kind of a leading indicator. It's saying what's your hiring intention. So I do think we'll probably see it continue to grow again from a relatively low base, but I think it's certainly an underpinning of the economic recovery.
Switching gears to retail sales, people were spending during the holiday season. We saw that, and they still are. So what are those numbers indicating at that point?
We're seeing the consumer kind of come out of the shell. There was a couple of years of retrenchment. Savings rate went up, which is good. You want households to kind of repair their debt situation and such, which they did. What you're seeing now is there was enough pent up demand, especially for kind of big ticket items and clothing, which is largely discretionary in terms of a purchase, and that has actually come back pretty well. People with jobs have wages growing, and that's an important thing to remember. That if you have a job, you're probably okay because you've kind of like reduced your debt burden and things like that. And in fact, if you look at the overall debt burden, meaning how much does it cost the average household to service its debts, whether it be credit card, mortgage, we're at like a 15-year low. So because interest rates are so low, people can kind of handle servicing their debts, and if they choose to spend, they do. So I think that's what we're seeing, and I don't think we're going to be in for a big consumer boom, a debt-fueled consumer boom, especially the way we were at the middle part of the last decade. But I do think you're seeing kind of a more normalized run rate of consumer spending.
Now, entirely switching gears to Egypt, there are people who are concerned that the crisis in Egypt is going to affect oil prices. Will we start feeling pain at the pump?
I don't think there's an imminent risk of a real big spike in energy prices right now, especially because of Egypt. Now, if we do get it, it's probably going to be less because of Egypt and more because global demand in the emerging markets for energy is continuing to run at a pretty hot pace. I think right now at $90 a barrel oil, we're okay. Remember, we were at 150 a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and that really did crimp consumer capacity to spend when you got gasoline prices toward $5 a gallon in some parts of the country. That's a problem. Right now, I think it's manageable. Egypt itself is not an oil exporter. The real concern is the general regional crisis over there that would especially infect Saudi Arabia, which hasn't yet happened. If that did happen, yes, then we have to worry about $100 plus barrel oil, and that would definitely be a challenge to consumers.
We have a chat room question for you, Michael.
We have a lot of chat room
questions. A lot of chat, and
today.
just so the chat room knows, this is a new feature for us. They put up a monitor so I can see your question. So as you see me looking this way.
You can see the latest questions, but the questions began a while ago. Michael, with the unemployment report and the jobs report being released at the same time, and they're often at odds, is there a reason why they're released at the same time?
Well, the government wants to give you a kind of a general sense of the labor picture. The unemployment rate and the payrolls number are actually derived from separate surveys. It's a little bit confusing. So the payrolls number, basically they survey employers and try to get a good sampling of employers to see how many people they're employing. That's the main number. That's the one that most people on Wall Street look at. That's the real important number in terms of net jobs created or destroyed. The unemployment rate is derived from what's called the household survey, which is literally people from the government going door to door or calling people and saying, did you work last week? Did you want to work last week? And that's more about essentially households saying whether they had enough work that they desired. So I think it does often cause a confusing picture, but the trends tend to be similar. So if you look at like a 4-month or a 6-month average of each of those numbers, it's pretty much going to tell you a similar story. The big swing factor, as I mentioned, is in the household survey. If you've said you didn't look for work, you're not counted as unemployed. So the size of the labor force, meaning the size of the number of people looking for work, really does impact that unemployment number, which is important politically, but I think less important economically than most people make it out to be. So I think you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Also, keep in mind, when you're talking about 36,000 jobs created, even if it was 100,000 or 200,000 jobs created, this is an economy with 130 million jobs. So a monthly snapshot is really just a rough estimate. You shouldn't really put too much into it.
That's a great question. Who asked that question, Rick?
Dick Rathbone asked that question.
Thank you very much.
And what Dawn wants to know, what should young people be trained to do to be more employable in the near future?
Very good question. I think, it sounds glib, but trained to be flexible. I think that's one of the things you really learn about this economy. It takes people who have a capacity to kind of pivot from one kind of skill to another and be adaptable. That's a glib answer. But the other answer is healthcare is very long-term growth in terms of need for good people. There's a scarcity of engineering candidates right now. Engineering jobs go chronically unfilled. What's interesting, by the way, is that help wanted advertising, if you look at the volume of help wanted advertising online, it's actually pretty close to a record. So you have this weird mismatch between the people who need work and the kind of work necessary.
Well, is it just because there aren't enough qualified people for
In
that
part,
work?
it's because of that, yeah. The parts of the economy that really got hit in terms of the labor force were construction, to a lesser degree, kind of low-level manufacturing. And those are not the areas that, people don't need you to come put a roof on their house right now because they did it a few years ago. So I do think engineering, healthcare, and education to a lesser degree, but I do think education continues to be an area where people can find work.
Now, if our chat room is listening and thinking, well, those are great points, but I've graduated and I haven't trained in any of these professions, is there another part of that sector that they can explore? For example, pharmaceutical sales,
Sure.
If they know that they're not a pharmacist.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. there are areas in the growing segments of the economy where you can kind of slot yourself in. That's the flexibility that I mentioned. I happen to, kind of come from a liberal arts background where they train you for nothing, right. Therefore they train you for everything. And that's kind of the approach I think this economy needs. We're not looking necessarily for people with the specific content skills that the job requires. They're looking for people who, can kind of read a situation and adapt to the needs of the industry.
That was another great question. And again, who was that from, Rick?
That was from Dawn.
Dawn, thank you so much for that great question, Dawn. I don't want to leave anybody out. Any other questions?
Jeffrey Massey asks, is the housing bust still fueling our recession?
Well, the recession ended almost 2 years ago. Let's just be clear about that. The economy's been growing since then. The housing bust, however, has remained a drag. And I think it will continue to. I don't think housing is going to get better and lead us out of this time here. If you look at the overall supply of homes, we just have too many. To be honest with you, one of the best ways to deal with the housing bust would have been with a bulldozer to get rid of, because the problem with housing was that too many homes were built in areas, where they paved over swamps and deserts and told you it was paradise, as opposed to people actually wanting to live in a certain place. So I do think there's probably a downside bias to home prices. So we could have a 5 or 10% national decline again in home prices, but that's okay because we've already come down 30 or 35%. So that's kind of like closer to the bottom than the top. And I think what's going to happen is home sales, the volume of home sales will increase before the prices go up, which is good because at least it creates activity and it gets people into affordable homes. And I think you have a much more sane housing market right now. The problem is it's going to be a drag. And as I said before, new home sales is probably going to be a problem for a while because we just have too many.
Well, thank you so much for coming by and talking with us today. Second week in a row. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you.